emerging. So today we're talking about disruptive governance and place resilience. A silver lining from COVID is that there's a real readiness of people from all sectors and a whole range of organisations to collaborate to make great places, which we, as we all know, rely upon even more now. So today we're going to hear from two people about two special case studies which will show us different approaches to collaborative governance, and then we'll talk about what that means for resilience. So just so Laura and David know who they're talking to, we've got a real audience mix. We've got people from arts and culture, business, local government, state government, obviously community members, placemakers, not-for-profit, and no one from transport this time. So welcome to you all. So I think we'll just go straight into it, and we're going to start off with Laura. Now, Laura is from Ōtākaro.
Well done.
Salt Collective actually won the large-scale Place Project Award for Place Leaders Asia Pacific last year. So congratulations, Laura. But
Thank you.
I want to hand to you to tell us your story about what's happened in Christchurch. Obviously, you had an earthquake in 2011, which you recovered from, and Ethan, you have been there to look at that, and Joe, I think you were there as well, not long after that. So let's tell us your story about your governance model and how you've responded to that challenge, and how it probably benefited your response to COVID as well. But
yes.
Over to you, Laura.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for having us again. We're really excited to be able to share our story with you. In Christchurch, after the earthquakes, we needed to rebuild, and it was a central government-led kind of planning process that kind of overtook what the local government had initially started off with the community. And where Ōtākaro comes in is 2016. Sarah, the original government agency, finished up, and all these anchor projects were designed, and Ōtākaro was set up as a Crown-owned company whose job it was to deliver these different anchor projects like Metro Sports Facility, Te Pai Convention Centre, areas of public realm which would create new linear parks and greenways and promenades around the city to make a walkable, contained city core. And my role was created within this company called Ōtākaro. And when I started, I was thinking, what might placemaking look like in this context? We're a government company, but we only have this very limited mandate, spatially limited. There's only certain designated areas that we could work within. Financially limited, there was not very many dollars at all to do placemaking with, and the time frame was limited as well. I had to follow the construction program. So, for instance, if a new greenway was being built, we couldn't really do any activities placemaking wise until after that greenway had been built, and then perhaps there'd be an event to open it. And I was thinking, well, how is this sustainable if we were to do it that way? If we were to have an opening party for a new plaza that consisted of just booking a band and a stage and a couple of speeches, how is that actually creating sustainable change? And so I wanted to come up with a way that would work within those constraints of time, place, and budget, that would be replicable and scalable, and that we could test in different areas, and if it worked, then take those lessons forward. What we ended up doing was working with a bunch of the business owners and workers in the area over a period of about 12 weeks during 2017 in what was known as the Innovation Precinct then, to support them to create their own community housewarming party that reflected what their shared values were. And they decided they would do a Christmas celebration based around festive, nerdy family fun. And just about every business in the area, from tertiary institutions to travel agencies, regeneration agencies, and innovation hubs, all got involved and contributed their own flavour to this community housewarming party. And what we learned was that the property owners, although I couldn't get them involved in those sort of those planning sessions, they didn't come along, but what I learned was they were watching. And so that process created the opportunity to then meet with them and say, hey, what did you think? They said, well, we love it. We'd love to see more of this happening all the time. Why doesn't the council just come on in and run events here all the time? This is what our tenants need. And I said, well, the local government doesn't and never will have enough budget or the structural programming to be delivering bespoke event programming for every deserving neighbourhood in the city. That's just not going to happen. But how about if you guys were to, instead of acting in silo as property developers, work collaboratively as destination developers? And they thought, potentially that could work, but a problem is the name Innovation Precinct. Nobody's ever going to say, hey kids, let's go and hang out this weekend at the Innovation Precinct. And so one of the things that Ōtākaro was able to do was to sponsor the cost of getting somebody to come in, somebody who they had chose to come in and facilitate getting them on the same page with what an alternative might be. Not to say that we don't want this to be an innovation precinct, but you don't need to be called innovation precinct to be one. And every great innovation precinct is so much more than just innovation. And this young guy came in, Josh Thompson, and he really dug into the different values that people had expressed in the area through the community engagement process earlier on, and he came up with this concept for Salt District, and everybody just kind of jumped on board and it took off organically. Nobody ever asked for permission. I think that's one of the great learnings from this process is if you are embedded in a place and talking to people and listening, then there are so many things you can do that don't require permission. If the community are connected with each other and there's something they want, there's no reason why they can't actually just make that happen. So that was a really great lesson to learn early on. I wanted to just quickly talk before I hand over to David about some of the thinking that we had to do with the place. So often place projects are planned in kind of plan view. You know, you look at a map of a place, and I think that creates a false sense of confidence and also creates blind spots. I really feel that you know, you can't work with place when you think in 2D, because place is actually a connected and dynamic system. And the reason I think that is because to be successful, any place needs to support and be supported by the surrounding area. So therefore, place is a system. And so you can't just think, oh, what could we do? What could we activate? What pop-up could we do in this vacant space? You just need to think about, what is the community of this place? What are the assets of this place that we could build on? Because they're the perfect building blocks for authentic placemaking projects. And as we are facilitating these projects, what are we actually trying to achieve here? We're trying to build a place-based network. And that's not just a directory, it's a learning network. And so one of the things that I really reflected on, I'll just find share screen now. There we go. There are really 5 elements of places. The destination, you know, your plazas and what have you, that's just one part of that place system. There's the physical stuff, the hard, what we call the hard assets, but there's also the soft assets, which are the community of the place and all the things that they bring to the table, or potentially could, you know, their aspirations, their skills, talents, knowledge, their memories, their stories, their networks, as well as their financial resources and other things that they can contribute, their time. There's the community of place, that it may have an identity. There's the local economy. Now, in a place that's fragmented, like after a disaster or perhaps after a serious recession, I think often these 5 elements of place are not connected with each other. They don't have any bearing on each other. But what we really want to aim for is for those to be connected up into a system that has all these positive feedback loops. And the beauty of placemaking projects is that you can connect those rings up into this place system as you go. So for instance, if you're doing your projects in a way that builds on the assets of the place, and you're connecting people up and building social capital, it's like the things that you have, the things that you know and things that I know, we can't help each other unless we know each other. But when we do know each other, our resources are amplified. So you really want to build the social capital, and you can do that through a placemaking project. As you do that, the community of place becomes more cohesive. As they become more cohesive, it's easier to talk about shared values. When everybody is comfortable thinking about what their shared values are, then you have the ability to build a strong identity from those values. And the identity will be sustainable because it's built on shared values, things that people really care about, as opposed to some random brand that any old agency could have dreamed up for any place. And when you have, everybody has that strong sense of what their identity is, then you can be authentic to that in the things that you do to activate the destination. The reason I've got town team in here between the thriving local economy and the vibrant destination is because I really feel there needs to be community-led place governance. And I spent a long time looking at all these different governance models, and the town team system, the town team model, is by far the best place-led governance model that I came across. And when you have the business owners and the tertiary institutions and the community groups all able to work together with residents and artists and whoever else wants to be part of things in shaping their place, that's the best way for the surrounding area to thrive, as well as the actual destinations to be vibrant. And when the businesses and tertiary institutions do well, everyone does well, because the human and financial capital grows, which can in turn build the assets of the place. And so this is what we've called the SALT model, because SALT District is where we tested this way of thinking. And I think the beauty of seeing place as a system is that it enables you to be a lot more strategic in terms of how you approach the placemaking. So you're not just thinking about the activity or counting visitors to your event, or counting the number of hits or likes on a website. It goes deeper than that, and the effects last longer. I think I'll leave it there and hand over to David. Hopefully I haven't gone on too long, Joanne.
No, Laura, I just wanted to ask you
Andy?
a couple of questions before we flick over to David. Post-COVID, I think we had a bit of a conversation where you talked about what the situation was like. I know you're only in lockdown in New Zealand for 4 weeks, but yes. You talked about the social rebuild, which was similar to the post the earthquake, but you talked about how the collective then talked about a big idea and how that evolved into, is it ARCC?
Yes.
I'm just wondering whether you could just share a little bit so that the audience can get an understanding of how that collective works, given it's community-led, which includes industry partners, and how you then interacted with government, to particularly the council, to ask for change and so forth. I think there are a few things that you can share.
Yes. When we started to head into COVID, the trustees of SALT Collective were all thinking, what is it that we can do to support this area? We came up with a number of possible things that we could do in collaboration with other sort of emerging neighbourhoods within the city, and we realised actually there is nobody to act as a conduit for funding support to neighbourhoods like SALT District. And so we put together this proposal called ARCC, or ARC, which is Action, Reaction, and Connection in Christchurch. And the idea was for this to be an organisation that can act as a conduit for support to all the different neighbourhoods, and it would do there would be three main pillars of this organisation. One would be placemaking, and that would be facilitating the emergence of neighbourhoods and support for neighbourhoods to develop their community, their identity and their destination, with the idea that our central city if it had about, say, 10 of these little walkable 5-minute neighbourhoods all together, that would be an amazing place. The second pillar is legacy projects, which would be things which require a specific project manager, quite a big budget, but would be things that are permanent, one-offs, that don't compete with anything already existing, and really add value to make the city buzz and pop. And there's a number of really groovy ideas in there. And then the third pillar is marketing. And the idea is that if you do cool shit, then you have something to talk about. And if you don't, then you're just campaigning with a bunch of different slogans to try and come up with a fresh marketing angle. And that's just, yeah, then we feel like you can't just come up with slogans. You need to organise. And so ARC was an organising idea. We made a submission to the City Council through the Business Association, and that wasn't supported, but we have a long-term plan coming up next year. And I know the council is currently working on what their placemaking strategy could potentially look like, and encouraging all the existing funded placemaking groups in Christchurch to really think about 5 years ahead from now, what is it that we all want to be doing so that we're still adding value, but just really creating change and working together in a way that is different to now, with all these little placemaking groups kind of doing their own thing in their own way. And yeah, with the goal being really, the social rebuild is almost the more important thing. The physical rebuild is kind of in hand. There have been spaces planned, budgets allocated. They're shovel-ready projects, if you like. But neighbourhoods could be shovel-ready projects too, couldn't they, with a bit more flexible thinking?
That's a perfect place to stop, Laura. That was a great example. It just gives people a little bit more understanding about the machinations that collective has, and how it can be mobilised for action. I think Laura has shared too that there's a link on your website that has more information about the SALT model as well.
Yes.
Which we'll share at the end of the session. But
Sure.
Laura, we'll come back to you in the conversation, but right now we'll go across to Perth, to David Doy, who is the leader of the, actually I haven't got your title, David, but I call you the Place Plan Guru, so I think I'll just stick with that. But and I'll just get you to unmute yourself, David. While David's just getting himself organised, I might get Joe to share another poll for you, which was about the barriers to governance, Joe. And so whilst David's probably just getting his PowerPoint presentation up, if the audience would just want to have a quick look at this and say, what are the top 2 barriers to using alternative governance models for place resilience? Okay, David, can I hear you now?
Yes, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Excellent.
So thank you for joining us. So this is obviously a bit of a different slant. So Laura's talked to us about particularly the collective, which was born out of a disaster. Your work at the City of Vincent Park wasn't born out of a disaster, but you're building collective value through your organisational change and place plan. So I'll hand to you to sort of share your story.
No worries. Yeah, I guess what has occurred at the town of Vic, well, from City of Vincent first, and now the town of Vic Park, is probably about the disruptive governance part of the title of this webinar more than anything, but it certainly flows into place resilience. I think this is probably might be useful for some organisations who are thinking about how to get the most out of their organisation or lead some sort of change in their organisation, but just bear in mind that this was right for the town of Vic Park, and it's not right for every organisation. But there might be some things in here that you can use. So for those people who are not familiar with Perth, the town of Vic Park is really the inner east of Perth. It's on the doorstep to the Perth CBD, across the river. There are 9 distinct neighbourhoods. We're very lucky. It's quite an interesting place, but there are 9 distinct neighbourhoods, all very different in the town. And that includes the Burswood Peninsula, which is where where Optus Stadium and Crown Perth is as well, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. But really, today's presentation is really about the town as an organisation knowing it needed to change its approach and being brave enough to change its approach towards a place approach, and really aspiring to get better outcomes in our places. And so, Ethan, I hope you don't mind, but I'm totally plagiarising the PPS website. I can't help that, and I'm sorry if I've breached any copyright laws. But I use this diagram all the time because it really sums up the journey that we are on as an organisation, which is really trying to pull ourselves out of a siloed or discipline-led way of thinking, and really, while respecting the various specialities, having a real focus on places and respecting that places are complex ecosystems. But we knew that in order to enable that change, we really needed a role within the organisation to bring those disciplines together, and that's what the place leader is, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So at the town of Vic Park, we don't talk about placemaking or placemakers as a separate discipline. Everyone is a placemaker. Everyone has a role to play, and I'm not just talking about people in the organisation. I'm talking about everyone generally across the community. We all have a role to play because places are complex. There is no one person that brings it together or brings a place to life. We all have a role, and whether it be, looking after the built environment or, bringing spaces to life or designing the public realm, we all have a role to play. And so it's respecting that, but we also, at the town of Vic Park, we knew that we needed a group of people to bring the disciplines together, and that's where the place leader role was born. And we call it, at the town, sometimes we refer to it as organisational glue. These are the people that really are responsible for understanding the neighbourhood that they're responsible for, but bringing those disciplines together to make sure that we're delivering the best possible outcomes for a place. So this is this presentation is really about the organisation, not necessarily about the community, although we can talk about that later. But it's really about organising our own selves, our own back of house first. The place leader team here at the town, each place leader is responsible for a neighbourhood within the town. They are responsible for driving the vision within that neighbourhood. The place leader team is a multidisciplinary team, so it's not just planners, urban planners, or it's a team full of different levels of expertise. We have economists, a landscape architect, urban planners, a lawyer. We have a microbiologist. It's a really interesting and broad-ranging team. And we feel like we can solve most issues, but we also have an incredible array of expertise and understanding in the organisation, but most importantly across the community that we constantly tap into on a day-to-day basis. And so this is our story of disruptive governance, but it's probably interesting to know that it's not just happening here at the town or in other local governments. It's happening across many other organisations as well, who have grown with large parts of it that specialise in a particular area, and they're looking for a way to bring those specialities together. And if we want, we can talk about some of those case studies later as well, because it is an interesting phenomenon that's happening. So, sorry, Sandy, I know you said keep slides less wordy, but I couldn't help but fill this one with some words. And so I just have to kind of explain the role of a place leader, because they really are a leader. There's a reason why there's a leader in the title. They have a big job. They oversee the program of work in the town. So the program of work is not born from different silos within the town, and then you hope that there's a program of work that's cohesive at the top, because we know that's not how. That's a recipe for confusion and also contest. And so now what we have is a team of place leaders who try to make sense of their place, the organisation, and they work with the community to deliver a program of work that makes sense. Their role is also to get in with that community and facilitate place governance. So that can be through the emergence of place groups and town teams, but also some other interesting governance setups, which I'm going to talk to you about soon at the Burswood Peninsula. They need to understand the data, and they work with parts of the organisation to understand what the numbers are saying. They are responsible for designing the public realm. So they will do conceptual work and take it through the approvals process, and then that helps to set the capital works program. So they are responsible for setting a large part of the capital works program. They also take a strategic view with events and activation and working with local groups and people to bring their spaces to life, as well as anything that the town wants to get involved in. And then they set the planning framework as well, which is a really powerful combination with that capital works program. They are responsible for destination marketing, investment attraction. And then the last thing, and as if they didn't have enough, they now oversee the town's COVID-19 recovery as well. But because they are the program setters of the town, they're very well placed to be able to bring things forward or push things back based upon what we think we need in our recovery in the next phase. But I can't stress enough, this is all in partnership with the citizens of the town, where all in different ways, shapes and forms, but it's wherever we can, it's in partnership with the citizens of the town, and it's community led wherever we possibly can. So the case studies are broad and different. Here at the town, we have a university precinct, and we have vibrant high streets and town teams that are doing all sorts of crazy stuff, and station precincts. But the guys asked me to talk about something that's totally different but very interesting, which is the Burswood Peninsula Alliance. Burswood Peninsula is right at the tip of the town. It's very different to all of the other precincts within the town, where it is made up of heavy hitters. So it's not an established neighbourhood with interesting little high streets. It's a area where there are large pieces of land owned by extremely powerful and wealthy stakeholders, including the state government. And that's made up of West Australia's largest stadium, Optus Stadium, Crown Perth, which is a big casino and hotel development. We have some of the nation's largest developers with significant and emerging communities. And then the state transport and planning authorities have a big role to play out here. So it's extremely political, and everyone likes to remind everyone about the power they hold. And when I started here at the town, before the place approach was put in place, it was extremely chaotic out on the peninsula, with these stakeholders not talking with one another. And I can't stress to you enough that while this organisational-wide place approach is extremely powerful in our existing precincts, it's just as powerful working with these stakeholders as well. So we've managed to, by appointing a place leader for the Burswood Peninsula and being far more cohesive as an organisation in how we deliver out in the peninsula, we've managed to pull together a governance structure for the peninsula now that brings all of those stakeholders together on a fortnightly basis, including CEOs all the way down to those operations people, to actually start working cohesively, working with their local community to deliver better outcomes, rather than this pulled apart and strange sports park that was emerging. And so there have been enormous challenges along the way, but that is working incredibly well now, as we understand each other's needs, but also a shared understanding of the needs of the peninsula, and how that actually helps everybody achieve achieve their goal. And so I think that's just an interesting case study for everybody here to know that this approach and this focus on places works across any type of precinct. It's transcendent. So that's probably in a nutshell and an overview. Sandy, I don't know whether you wanted me to dive into anything further in detail, but that's I try to keep it to my 15 minutes.
No, David, that was fantastic. Can I just ask one question? And I know there's a question in the chat to Laura as well, which is, how is that funded? The alliance, is it just a loose group of people like CEOs and so forth coming together, or is it have people put money into it? What's the story there?
No funding. So it's
no funding. No funding.
No funding.
Laura, I'll just get David to answer, and then I'll come back to you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No funding. It's just it's a group of people that have come together, knowing that they needed to come together. To try and get a better outcome for the place. And anytime there's a project that needs to be delivered, it's through negotiation and discussion between the stakeholders.
And a further question to that is, what keeps them at the table?
Us. Through constant conversation, understanding people's needs, being willing to compromise, but also being willing to persuade as well. So not being afraid to have tough conversations and persuade, and really understand your case and the case for that place, and never giving up. And
David and Laura, I'll go to Laura next. David, it's not a legal entity, obviously. It's has a charter. And Laura, yep. Going back to you for the SALT. So the ARC group, the ARCC?
So ARC is not a legal entity either. It is also an alliance. It's also unfunded. It is possible because of the work that came prior, building the town teams, building the SALT collective town team. And so it's really through relationships and this demonstrated track record that there is enough goodwill and respect for people's abilities to work together as a think-do tank.
Great, thank you, Laura. David, that was sensational and perfect amount of content. But I'm going to bring Dean and Ethan into the conversation now and take their perspectives on what you've both shared. And I can't see Dean. I'm just not on gallery view yet, which I am now. But Dean, what did you think about what Laura and David said?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. I love listening to Laura and David talk, because I think they're two of the best examples of visionaries and leaders in the placemaking movement, and really sort of turning that vision and the place-led approach into reality. And it's interesting the amount of work and effort that goes in behind the scenes to the organising and leading within the organisations too. And I took a stack of notes, but a few things I did want to touch on was that systems approach. And if you haven't heard about systems thinking or not au fait with it, it's worth spending a little bit of time to research, because it's a different way of thinking and organising. And I was fascinated to do a bit of research on the difference between complicated and complex. And if you want to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, do a bit of Googling on that, because what we do in governance is often around complicated problems and issues, whereas what David and Laura are really talking about is the complexity of place, but also the opportunities with getting it right, and the benefits that can accrue from that. And a couple of other things, that leadership across disciplines and silos is so critical. And the place champion or the place leader really is the visionary, but also the organizer, sometimes behind the scenes, but also sometimes in the community as well, and that public face of selling that big vision and also making it happen. And I guess putting in place long-term structures that are going to guarantee, or hopefully guarantee, success. So David talked a fair bit about the internal work to collaborate across the organisation and having that place-led approach, and the same with Laura, also touching on the hardware, software, and the need to be doing both. It's not just a physical rebuild in a place like Christchurch, that a lot of the soft infrastructure is just important, and the identity and language that's used. And Laura, I thought that was a great example of turning an idea that's a bit of a buzzword like an innovation precinct into something that actually means something and people can identify with. So I guess the last point, Sandy, I just wanted to mention was the real need for positive relationships and trust. I don't think any of this can happen in a top-down imposed way. You really need to build those relationships over a period of time and develop trust and have people working together.
Thanks, Dean. I can see a question from Yan Lin to David, and with regards to the Burswood Peninsula, did you go to them or did they come to you, David?
No, we were proactive and went to them, so we could see how it was playing out at the peninsula, and it was, you know, getting back to that sort of that being the glue, the connector. There was a role for us to play to bring those stakeholders together at the table, and work through talk about the issues and then try and come up with some proactive responses that suited the different organisations.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Dean. And Ethan, you talk about the resilience dividend of place, and you know where place capital's built. It was interesting to listen to both Laura and David and hear Dean's comments. What's your take on what these two examples show you in terms of resilience? You might be able to link it to some examples that you've seen in the US recently post-COVID.
Sure. Well, it's honestly it's thrilling to hear these examples. Really, you know, leading in so many ways. You know, interestingly, that diagram, David, that you showed, actually don't know who made it, but it came out of a workshop. One of my first trips ever to Australia. In 2007, we did a trainings with Gilbert Rouge-Couste around all over actually New Zealand and Australia. And the CEO of the Sunshine Coast after the training made that statement. Just the provocative idea that I'd never heard before, that what if we organized around our governance systems around place and made that the shared goal? And that discussion, you know, and really that whole trip around Australia really sent me on this journey of what would place-led governance look like. And it's really thanks to Australia and New Zealand that we've gotten to learn a lot about this, and these examples are, you know, are the leading edge of this. And of course, Town Teams has been you know, has been connecting these types of efforts, nurturing them and articulating them better than anyone. The diagrams, the thinking that Town Teams has developed and Dean is you know, really always inspiring to me. But what's interesting is that in the US, you know, we haven't had this type of thinking, but because placemaking has emerged more from the community sector. It hasn't emerged from government. And so my general perspective is that every part of the world is leading the placemaking conversation from a different sector and leading with strengths, but also perhaps blocking the other sectors. And so in that process, so, you know, in the US, you know, in the 80s, 90s, placemaking developed more as community groups, as foundations, philanthropic funding, or from business improvement districts, because government wasn't doing a good job. And so it's really networking this conversation globally, but especially between, I think, you know, our two parts of the world, that we can figure out the best models for place-led governance. And I think we have, you know, so much to learn in the US. And then, of course, I think these are particularly relevant to fast developing parts of the world, that where government actually is strong, but still shaping itself, and how they're actually formalizing and degrading community capacity and resilience by feeling like they're supposed to have more of a top-down controlled perspective, when a lot of the informality, the town teams actually already exists in a lot of communities. Yesterday, this time, we were doing a webinar for the ASEAN countries for a placemaking conference they had there, and yeah, they're talking about, you know, the conversation was about informality in governance, in placemaking processes, and the public spaces themselves, and how that needs to be looked at as a strength to build upon. So in a way, I think in Australia, we're trying to get more informality again in, you know, in the community process and governance systems as well. But so I loved, you know, both these examples, you know, and Laura talking about, you know, so many great quotes there that I want to, can't wait to hear again. But but that you can't think of place in two dimensions is so key, and that really runs to the biggest challenge that we've seen in the obstacles to placemaking is that this tendency for experts to sort of try to give order to everything and take away the complexity, but also try to make it sound like it's too complex for communities to understand or to participate in. And that place is indeed a system, and that we have to build these place-based learning networks. And in a way, that's really what the goal of Placemaking X is on all scales, is that to sort of turn upside down the shaping of cities, the shaping of our communities, to lead with place and to create that iterative process of building community learning networks, creating places, community learning networks reflexively, and then network those efforts across the city, a region, and globally. So we're trying to get the learning to feedback, back up. We realize, we've learned a lot about placemaking, but there's infinite more wisdom and knowledge, from communities, and every part of the world is doing something really innovative and holding back and being blocked in other ways. So, we have to look at these localized place governance efforts as part of a networked system, across Australia and New Zealand and globally.
I think, Ethan, that was really interesting how you then shared that, looking at the US, looking at Australia, looking at different parts of the world, that it can be led differently. So we've got government tends to play a role. So it's about, government here allowing community and industry to work together, and the opposite in the US. So I was wondering with Laura and David, like since COVID, have you seen any particular actors within those alliances that you have, whether it's the SALT Collective or whether it's Burswood Peninsula, behave differently and want to do more around place as a response to COVID, given the economic impact and social impact that it's had? Have you seen any actors behaving differently?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's a lot greater sense of urgency. There's a lot lower tolerance for bureaucratic slowness. And when an idea comes up that might have legs, the conversations to test that amongst other peers, those peers now being other people within the city who also care about making things happen, which didn't exist before. So those conversations happen very, very quickly. And an idea can go from something sparked off in conversation at the pub to a full-on funding application and pitch to a ministry of central government within 6 weeks, which is unthinkable a few years back. And that's an example of the kinds of things that can happen when you start. It's like start slow to go fast. Do you know what I mean? It takes time and it's baby steps building those place-based networks. But it is all about community, and I just think I love lighter, quicker, cheaper, but there's no lighter, quicker, cheaper way to build neighbourhoods. You need to actually have skin in the game and be in it for 3 years to connect people up, to create a culture of warmth and to this idea of shaping a place together. I love what Dean said earlier about how, and actually, just come back to me in a couple of minutes. You want to go on, Sandy?
No, I was going to flick to David, but what you said was great, because the disruptive governance, which was around the collective you've formed, has enabled that resilient response, which is to quickly be able to mobilise action in response to something, to build place capital. David, did you see this? Did you see anything similar with the Burswood Peninsula group?
Yeah, with Burswood Peninsula, yes. And I'll maybe talk about that and some of the other things that I've noticed as well. But with Burswood Peninsula, a lot of it's become a very opportunistic time. So how can we access funds and get support in order to do the things that we want to do in the name of COVID-19 recovery? So there's been a lot of opportunism and advocacy. And it's just the nature of it's a big, it's a place with big projects and big money and big people, and so there's been a lot of that. But more interestingly, back in the rest of the Vic Park in the community, there's been an enormous urgency to do things but then also trepidation about breaching restrictions in an effort to do those things. So everyone's very keen to get involved and be an active citizen, but not at the same time not sort of getting in trouble for breaching a restriction. So it's been it's been our job to be able to get out of the way where we can, or to facilitate things to happen, but to help people navigate the restrictions that are in play. So we've had things like car-free days where streets have been shut by the community to allow businesses to spill out on the street as a recovery measure, but doing that in a way that doesn't breach restrictions is our job to help people navigate through. And so there's been a lot of community planting days and getting back into parks and taking active ownership. And it's our job to try and facilitate that to happen without taking it over. And that's been more interesting than the Peninsula, which is just a hot grab for cash at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, and what you're pointing to, though, is that by having that collaborative group, it means decision making is faster, barriers are removed quickly, whether that's regulatory.
Yep.
And so that's tremendous. I know Claire in New Zealand, she's saying there's quite a few examples of co-governance in New Zealand, and she's pointing to one where the local community doing the maintenance of the reserve and working alongside the council to co-design it. And interestingly enough, David, we were talking before this in Davidstown Garden on a program on Friday night, they profiled the urban forest strategy, which was completely community-led, which is something you need to look up. I'm just now, Joe, we're going to talk about what makes this work and not work. This was the result of the polls for the barriers, which I'll just let you look at, perhaps the panelists, and we might make some comments about that. And then at the same time, I might get Joe to do the poll for the enablers. But it's interesting, it's fairly even spread. Existing systems are difficult to change. People's mindsets, risk and compliance. Probably the highest one, organisations not wanting to let go of control. I think, Ethan, to your point, that might be more of a case in Australia that we've been trying to grapple with, is councils letting go, government letting go, so that it can be community-led. Anything surprising in that result?
Well, I guess for me, Sandy, it just really highlights the complexity of the issues that we're working towards, and one solution or one answer or one buzzword's not going to get through those challenges. So it's a good illustration of that.
One thing strikes me from looking at this is 23% of people don't know what alternative governance models there are. Or how to implement them. I think so often people talk about bids. I know there's over 1,000 bids, business improvement districts in the US alone. The thing about a business improvement district is, whilst it can mobilize people to form a vision and an action plan, and it provides a mechanism for sustainable funding for that leadership group to take an area forward, it excludes everybody else who cares about that place, from the school kids who are there every Friday, the residents, the tertiary institutions, people who work in a shop, the artists. Business improvement districts are about business owners, but our cities are about everyone. And what I love about the town team movement is it's a place-led governance structure that enables everybody who cares about a place to get involved. So what you'll generally find is it's going to be people who have a significant and ongoing interest in the place. It's the community of place. And too often we don't even think about the community of place. We think of the community as all the people who are our ratepayers, for instance. The community of place are the people who have a significant and ongoing interest in the place. So they can form the town team. And the thing that I love about town teams is there's this charter. So all you need to do to become a town team is just adopt the charter, which is like a code of conduct or like an attitude for the town teamway. It's about being positive and proactive. And that's the one thing that town teams all have in common. Apart from that, they can be as unique as you like. It costs nothing to join. As we saw from the Burswood Peninsula example that David talked about, and from ARC, you don't have to be a formalised entity, a society or a charitable trust. You can simply be an alliance. But that alliance or place-led group, it really needs to be inclusive of everybody. And that's why I think the business improvement model is outdated and it should be left in the past.
So Ethan, I'd be keen to hear your views on the Business Improvement District. They certainly were born in the US and have a role, but I think industry and government, industry does have a bigger role in urban development than here in the US. But
yeah, no, definitely, and I agree and find that advocacy really valuable and important. And I think as we talked about a little bit before, I think again each of these models there's a trajectory towards place-led governance that needs to be kept in check, kept honest as it moves to being as multi-sector, and as diverse from a demographic perspective and discipline perspective as possible. And so place-led is about always facilitating, going with where there's some energy, with what other sector is helping to lead, or but then always saying, well, who's not there? Who else do we need to bring in to benefit everyone? It's often an additive. It's almost always a very additive experience, and often even when there's some conflict, if you're setting it up with the goal to create great places, that conflict, the mistakes even can be made to be useful. They can be made to be a learning opportunity or an energizing force if the process is facilitated right. So it is really this place facilitation skill that's so needed in these efforts. But yeah, certainly business improvement districts they responded to a void that government wasn't filling in the US for clean and safe, and they've started some of them have gotten more into proactive placemaking and inclusion efforts in a variety of ways. But there's fundamental barriers to how far they can really go with that, certainly. That's why, again, these models, I think we need to network the learning on this globally. There are you guys should get merchants and businesses more involved and have more ownership over the public realm and contribute to it, but see themselves, in this diversified model that you're leading on. So these models are, they're simple, they're common sense, but they're really bold, and they are a roadmap for, reinventing governance and participation and democracy, all over the world. It's so in the simplicity is what the ways you're describing it are really powerful, and we need to capture this and articulate this in a cohesive way. We've talked about in a way I'd love to figure out, Placemaking X is also free to join, and it's open in these ways, but what we haven't figured out is how to get it's more sort of people that are leading these conversations. It's a little wonky network of us perhaps, but the next phase is how do we get this to be a backbone for a much broader place movement. And the town teams models, and what you are talking about may be the mechanism to develop that. We just one more thought on that is that we've been brainstorming creating a placemaking core, sort of like the Peace Corps, to help drive recovery around the world, and to unleash facilitators of places in communities that tap into network learning, maybe have some resources or grants to draw from, but go to places of greatest need and to facilitate action around place and rebuild participation, democracy, and local economies.
Thank you, Ethan. It's interesting. I think one of the barriers can be that sometimes we can look for a sure thing. We look for what is the sure governance model that's going to work to deliver a place outcome. Now that's coming from a top-down perspective. So I think as soon as around the world places can let go of that, and to Dean's point, have trust and start with the place, and it might start from a small alliance or group of people just acting out of the passion for the place, it will soon evolve into what it needs to be to actually affect the change. And I think there's almost like a continuum of models. There's not just one that fits one place, but I think credit to Placemaking X for sharing so we can learn from everyone. But we're almost running out of time, and Joanne's just released the poll, the last poll, which is some of the enablers. So people are just voting now, what are the enablers of different governance models? So Joanne, as soon as those results come in, I'll get you to share that, because we'll conclude on that. We've got 2 minutes left.
Sure, Sandy, I might just wait a couple more seconds. We nearly have all of our participants voted, but they're still coming in.
Could I just jump in there for a moment? Just to turn the other side of the coin of the business improvement district model that talked about where you have the ability to create funding to take an area forward. There are alternatives that I think we all are interested in learning about, and they are place improvement districts or neighbourhood improvement districts. And if we shift our minds away from thinking that businesses are the only people able to contribute, and think in that more inclusive way, how else could everybody else contribute? You know, everybody is valuable. Everybody can bring something to the table. Maybe there's some way of putting together, you can levy people based on, time or skills, not just money or rateable value. I think there are so many different ways that we could look at making neighbourhoods able to be self-sustaining. And maybe that's a topic to explore at some point in the future.
And Laura, I'll close on that comment, because I think that's why people gravitate to the charter, and the place charter, is that it enables people to all bring their own value.
Yes.
Whether that's financial or not financial.
Yes.
It's just bringing themselves. I think that's what COVID's done, is stripped away, and people you're just seeing humanity coming together for place, and that's what's needed to move it forward. And Joanne's released the results for the enablers. So the highest ranking one was the ability for organisations to let go of control and allow leadership to emerge. Actually, that is trumped by, I will never use that word ever again, but that is Bidened by a place champion or place leader that drives. So I don't think we need to actually discuss those enablers. I think that's exactly what we need, to let go and to allow leadership emerge and allow those place champions to perhaps guide us wherever that leadership comes from. And that will be disruptive, and it will deliver us. So I think we're right on time to conclude. David, thank you so much. Laura, thank you so much. Dean, thank you as usual. And Ethan, so tremendous for you to join us from New York. Joanne, did you want to say anything at the end? Joanne kindly hosts this and brings it all together from Place Leaders Asia Pacific.
Thanks, Sandy, and thank you, everyone. That was a marvellous presentation. I think ending it on the role of a place champion is probably ending it on the beginning of a new topic that we need to discuss, because within that place champion, there's a particular personality and particular drive and way of operating that I think probably needs another whole webinar to work through. But thank you for all of our participants and our audience.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joanne. The recording will be available on Town Team Movement, Place Leaders Asia Pacific, Placemaking X, and it's on the YouTube channel that belongs to Place Leaders, but we'll share it. And if not, please just contact any one of us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.